Up next, what paint do you use? That's a question I get asked a lot, as well as what caps you use. So you've got three families of paint, of spray paint. So you've got low pressure, high pressure, and water-based. They're the three that I can think of. And as far as the caps, you got another three families. You got skinny caps, you got fat caps, and then you got specialty caps. Anything to do with like calligraphy, cap, something very big, something special, something like a needle cap. I find all of those other caps are good for effects, that kind of stuff. If you have a needle cap, is not actually for thin lines, it's actually for like a dribble or for shooting far. I find those needle caps are really good for doing a rust effect. But personally, I just use two, especially the different colors. One is black, one is orange. So when I'm painting, I know it's one or the other. They also have a different shape. So when I dig in my pocket, I can feel straight away which one I'm grabbing. So it's just quicker. As far as the pressure, why use two different paints? So it all depends on what you paint. Personally, most of what I paint is artwork. I don't really paint graffiti letters, and I don't really paint big areas. But when I do, I find having a paint like this, like this 94, MTN 94, works really well. It works well in high temperature, low temperature. It works well for detail. It works well for big fields. It's really useful. A paint like this, or a different brand, like say Loop, or Cobra, or Montana Black, all those other paints, or anything like a burner, like the bigger cans, all of those other caps, all of those other cans with more pressure will allow you to fill areas quicker, basically, especially if you pair them with a hardcore cap, which is a very fat cap, same as an Astro cap, the yellow Cobra. All of those caps are very fat, or well, they call fat caps or ultra fat caps. So when you pair a fat cap with a high pressure can, a lot of paint is going to come out at high speed. The thing is, you can get the same result with a can like this, but you'll have to wait a bit longer. So with this can, you can fill a big area with a very fat cap, but you'll have to pause a bit as you spraying, because there's not as much pressure that wants to force the paint out. Something like this, you will paint a lot quicker. And something like a burner mixed with ultra fat cap, then that's just the whole thing on steroids. Like you'll have so much paint coming out at the same time. But as for a different use, those cans are more for graffiti, for painting quickly, painting big volume, all that stuff. This is more for control. I also really like the colors on something like this. MTN 94 and Belton or Montana Gold, they're like the main three when it comes to details, because it's a really good paint. I found over the years, this is the paint that suits me best. Different artists like different things. I know somebody that loves Montana Black. I know somebody that loves Belton or Molotov, depending on the country. Personally, I find the control I get with this, like I can put a hardcore cap, which is a very fat cap, on this and get very skinny lines or very fat lines. So this is, well, they're my favorite caps, both of them. But this is so versatile. It allows me to do so much. It's great. But like I said in other videos, it's best for you to buy all sorts of different cans and try them out. If you're going to try a different brand, buy white, because white is the hardest to get right for manufacturers. So get a white can. Don't get a black can. Don't get a navy blue, because these are easy to get right. And you'll be like, oh yeah, it works fine. It's a good paint. So get a can of white and then see how you get on, and then judge the best paint for you. Personally, for me, I only use this. I get a few of these, but not so much. This is, well, it's meant to be a glossy paint, but it's not very glossy. And this is a matte paint. Most spray paint are matte. And these, as opposed to something you'd get in a car shop, which is very thin, like a primer, This is very thick, so in one coat you get full opacity. So these cans are really good. But these are my favorite ones. Like I said, I also recommend you try different ones and see what works for you. Okay, now that you bought your compressor, your airbrush, everything to go with it, what paints should you use? So this is a topic that's a lot more important than I thought it was. When I started airbrushing, I used a paint which I'm not going to name, and I struggled so much. And I was wondering, why is airbrushing so difficult? And don't get me wrong, it is. Out of all the techniques I'm teaching in this course, airbrushing is by far the hardest. But the paint also plays a part. I'm now using this paint, which is golden high flow acrylics. I'm putting them in these bigger bottles that I got online because it allows me to have more paint when I go to a job as opposed to have loads of bottles. It just works better. One of those holds two of the 118 mil that they sell, or 4 ounce. I think that's 250 mil or something. So that works really well. The other reason I use golden high flow acrylics is because the primary colors are very good and very strong and very expensive. So these ones are series 7 and they're the most expensive. I think this is series 1. I think this is series 1. This is series 3. And I think this is series 2. 1 is the cheapest and 7 is the most expensive. So, but it's hard for manufacturers to get a good red or pink pigment through refining. That's why it's more expensive. But I want to get the right colors. The thing is, as it goes, I'm going to start ditching the pink because most of the time when it comes to airbrushing, I'm just using red. I like having pink because it allows me to create the right colors, but a lot of the time it doesn't justify having to mix these two to get red. But I'm getting off track. Anyway, the reason I like this paint is it's very fluid, but it's fluid because it was ground as opposed to diluted. And when you're painting with this paint, you're going to make sure it's shaken properly. And then you put a few drops in your airbrush and it's ready to go. It just works perfectly. You can use that on cars as long as you lacquer it and do the prep and everything properly. You can use it on canvases, on walls, on wood, on whatever you want. If it's going to be out in the elements, you need to put a lacquer on it. But if it's an artwork, you don't. You can if you want to, but you don't have to. It's a very forgiving paint. It's a very accurate paint. I'm not sponsored, but it'd be nice if I was. But it's a paint that's very, very good. You've got loads of paints out there that you can try. But like I said, I've tried other paints and it hasn't been the best. There is one paint that is really good, and that is using a Posca pen. So the paints in Poscas work really well. Again, I've tried loads of different paints, and I'm not going to talk about any others than these two because they're the ones that work the best for me. So whenever you get a Posca, you have to, if you want to open them, you can swap the colors between them. But if you want to open them, you have to go counterclockwise. So basically tighten. And I might have opened this one before, maybe not. But they put some glue in there. So if you try and open it and you're struggling, you may have to use a pair of pliers. So you open it the other way around, and especially the black is so opaque. But the paint you got in there, you can put that straight in your airbrush, and it's a really, really good paint. I wouldn't say it's as good as this one because this is, first, the colors are better. All the colors you get in Posca, the yellow has got white in it, the pink has got white in it, so you can't mix them to get really deep, like a deep brown or whatever, like you can with those. But it depends what you're doing. If you're painting t-shirts and bar mitzvah, this will work perfectly. It's so fluid. It's actually more fluid than this paint, but they work equally well. Posca, very, very good paint to use. But when you're using this one, it's more durable. So as you're doing, if you're doing it for you, it's one thing. If you're doing it for clients, you want something that is going to last. The reason I use, so I use CMYKW, so cyan, magenta, yellow, black, white for all my colors. The reason I buy a brown, they don't have a brown that I like, so I use two different browns and then I mix my own and make my own thing. I buy a brown as opposed to having to mix all of this because the brown is a lot cheaper than using the magenta. So it works better. And then every time I need a brown or a beige, I just use this. If I need a beige, I just put a bit of white and sort it. And the red, even though the pigment is super accurate with this and I can make red by mixing these two, again, it's a bit counterintuitive as opposed to just buying red already made. So this is why I use that. So golden high flow acrylic, especially if you're beginning and you don't quite understand yet why the airbrush is not cooperating, get this paint. They come in smaller bottles as well. If you want to practice, just get one of the colors that series 1. Try to stay away from white if you're practicing, because white, regardless of if it's tattoo paint or whatever, white is always a bit harder to use. So try and use like even off-white, a beige would be easier, and the price would be reduced. Or if you just want to really practice your technique and go as quick as possible and get a black, if you're trying to decide on which paint to buy, always use a white because it's the hardest paint to get right. But if you just want to practice your technique and you don't care about the paint, go with black because it's the most pigmented and it's the one that'll give you the least amount of trouble. Okay, now we're going to talk about the paints you can use with a brush and a roller. So you've got so much choice out there. Obviously, I couldn't have all the paints. I've only got a few on the table. So we've got this is vinyl matte, which is a paint that you're going to use all the time in the UK at least, because that's emulsion. In the US, I know you guys use a lot of latex paint. This is masonry paint, which is kind of like the same paint, but it has anti-mold agents in there, and it allows the paint to breathe if you're painting on bricks and stuff. But basically, they all do a similar job. My favorite paints in the UK would be Leyland Trade, Dulux Trade, and Little Green. I find Dulux Trade and Leyland Trade are quite similar. They do a really good job and the price is decent. They're made by the same company as well as Crown, I think Valspar, and a few others. They're made by PPG. So I'm guessing the formula is kind of similar. So when it comes to paint, it's quite simple. You've got 3 main components. So you've got the pigment, which is the powder, what gives it its color. Sometimes it comes in a liquid form. Then you've got the solvent, what's going to dilute the paint. So either water for water-based paints, or it'll be a synthetic solvent or some other type of oil-based solvent. And then you got the binder, which is the glue. Sometimes you'll have PVA glue or acrylic. All of these glues, they're white and they dry clear. That's why a lot of the time when you get a color, it dries a lot darker than what you got because of this. So when you're painting it, it appears that it's a bit lighter because it's got white in it, but then it dries clear, so it dries a bit darker. So just a quick thing to remember. But I find Dulux Trade and Leyland Trade in the UK work really well for me, for my clients. But whenever whenever somebody wants a wall to be very durable with a bright color, say a bright pink or a bright yellow wall that's going to be facing the sun all the time, then I would go to Little Green. The price is way more, but that's because the pigment is a lot stronger. It's a much better, it's a better pigment, and it's a more concentrated pigment. So that paint is more expensive, but in time it lasts longer, so it works better. Also, Dulux Trade and Leyland Trade, as opposed to without the trade, the reason I buy the trade version is because it has more pigment. Again, if you're gonna, especially in white, white doesn't cover as well as anything else. So if you're gonna apply 3 coats as opposed to 2 coats, then are you really saving any money? Because it'll take you longer. You got to go back to the job. So that's why I buy this one. What I do as well is this is the same. This is the paint I get. I get like a 1 liter, and I get them to mix them. So I get a pink, a blue, and yellow, a black, and a white, and then I make my own colors with all of this stuff. I just put them in these bottles so it works better. I think this is Little Green, and these ones are Leyland pigment. And whenever I'm painting murals with this, it works so good. I've actually given up using acrylics, like artist acrylics. These are 2 brands that I quite like. This is Amsterdam. This is Daler and Rooney System Free. There's another one as well that I use, can't remember. But I just find, even though those are good, I just don't find they as good as these ones. Most of my murals are big, and like I wouldn't really be comfortable painting a canvas with this. I'd want something like this, but most of the time I would actually use my airbrush acrylics. This is Golden High Flow, very expensive paint, but they've got another one called Golden Fluid Acrylic, and it's also a very good paint. Fire and Ball, definitely not my favorite. You can't just paint it on the wall like this. I've tried. You can see the filler. After 5 coats, you still could see the filler. It's a paint you have to prepare. So you either have to use this or the primer that they sell, and then you apply this. The good thing about that is it'll give you the mattest finish out of all paints. It's almost like using lime paint. But most of the time you can't really tell. So if somebody wants like a dead matte finish, this is going to be the best way to get it. I don't like their paint for walls. I find it's not great. But I actually quite like their eggshell. All their paints are water-based. I think the water-based eggshell is a really good product. I've used it and I've been actually really surprised how good it was. But I find the paint that they have for walls is not as good as these ones. The result that you get, the finish you get with these are going to be slightly more shiny. I mean, this is a wall that I painted quickly, so it's not actually very good. Not great for painting walls, but anyway. I've used this paint, and it wouldn't be as matte as if I had painted with this paint, but honestly, most of the time you wouldn't know. Another tip as well, if you're not interested in becoming a mural artist and you just want to find out more about paint, and that's why you bought this course, another thing you need to know, it's no point spending a lot of money on expensive pigments if you're going to get a color like this. Anything that's gray, that's a dull color, anything to do with a pastel color, it's not going to wear as much as a vivid, bright color. Like a bright pigment will need to be strong in order to last in time. Yellow is the one that will fade the quickest, then magenta, and then blue. That's why sometimes you see some old posters and it just blue, like the 2 of the colors and the black have come off. So again, if you're painting a pastel or a gray or anything like that, just use a paint that's good but not as expensive as anything else, because you wouldn't really see the difference. Then again, unless you want a very dead matte finish, then you can get that. Right, so, oh yeah, another thing as well, this paint works really well when you dilute it. It keeps it consistent. But if you want something that you will dilute a lot and keep a lot of its coverage, then Little Green, out of all the paints I've used, is the champion. I mean, this paint is ridiculous. I had a job where a 2.5 liter tin of Little Green, and I bought it because it was a wrong mix. Otherwise, it would have cost like, I think it was £60. But come to think of it, I think it's actually worth it. And I diluted the whole thing with 50% water because I wanted a lot of drips. And it was so opaque, then I still had to dilute it further. Any other paint, you put 50% water and the coverage won't be as good, but that paint is crazy good. Okay, a quick thing about water-based versus oil-based paint. So I don't actually have any oil-based paints here at the studio, but so water-based paint penetrates really well, especially porous surfaces. Oil-based paint doesn't penetrate as well, but it's a very good barrier against the elements like water, for example. So say if you got a plank of wood, say you want to paint something on the outside and you want something to be very durable. Again, I'm talking about this in the other segment about how to prepare surfaces, but when you say you have a piece of wood that you want to go outside in the rain, the best is to use this paint, so just a normal wall paint, emulsion paint. You dilute it 50-50, you put a couple of coats of this, then you put that, and then you can put the oil-based paint on top. Obviously, you have to let it dry. And when you put the oil-based paint at the end, you put a couple of coats, that will be as strong as possible because the water-based will penetrate the porous surface, a piece of wood, a wall, whatever, and then the oil base will create a barrier. The problem is a lot of the time people will go to the shop, ask the sales assistant, they'll tell them, you gotta put one coat of undercoat, one coat of gloss onto unpainted wood and off you go. Or they'll say, oh, you gotta use this primer. But then you open the wood primer and then it's super thick. A primer, by definition, has to be thin in order to penetrate. So then you end up having something that once it rains, there's a bit of sun, rains, sun, rains, sun, the paint flakes and it's no good, even though you follow the instructions on the paint, on the tin. So whenever you want something to really work well, you got to use water first, diluted, and then you can use oil. So oil is really good at creating a barrier. Say you've got a water stain in so say you got a water stain on the ceiling or something. Once the leak or whatever the damage has been fixed, you can put a couple of coats of oil-based paint, sand it when it's dry, and then you can apply some water-based paint. It'll create a barrier, stop the water, all good. So they both have properties. It just depends what you want to do. Also, as far as finishes, it's not often that people use an oil-based finish on the wall. I'm a Frenchman. In France, it was very popular, and I think in Germany as well, to paint walls, especially bathrooms and kitchens, with oil-based paints. But it looks very dated and it doesn't look great. It's best to just live in the space. Once it gets bad, just paint it again. But, you know, people do different things, I guess. And then, so having an oil-based paint in a bathroom or a kitchen, it's really useful because then the water is not going to create any damage into any part of it. It won't look great, but at least, you know, it'll protect the space. So to recap, most of the paint that you'd be using as a mural artist would be your typical emulsion paint in different colors, unless you want to go the artist acrylic route, which is obviously up to you. Try both of the same color and then see what works best. I've done an artwork for somebody in a garage and they wanted really flat colors and I had to use brushes. And I was using this at first. Ditched that so quickly because 2 coats of this will equal about 3 coats of that. That's what I found out. So yeah, try what works for you and then see. A quick note as well, don't use this inside the house. Masonry paint is for outside. You shouldn't be breathing this inside a wall. Always use this for inside a wall or a latex paint.